wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is The System, Your Beliefs, Your Unique Children, How to Choose the Right Educational Pathway. So this comes from a listener's email, which we will read to you shortly after. I remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up on the homepage to join our tribe, where once a week once a fortnight, we'll send you off an email. We took it down to once a fortnight because we couldn't show up every week. We'll send you a newsletter with everything we put out in the world, and you can pick and choose where you'd love to click and dive a little deeper. And sometimes we'll send you something more intimate, a musing or a pondering that's, come out of something that's happened in our lives. It's a bit more intimate than social media. So if you're really looking to nourish your mother during the week, then this is the place to be, nourishingthemother.com.au. All right, Bridget, I'm going to read this gorgeous email. As you know, we absolutely adore the interactions we get via our beautiful listeners. And sometimes that's emails and sometimes that's messages. And we do truly read them all. And this one was a podcast suggestion. So here we go. Thank you, Julie and Bridget. I am forever inspired by you both. I was wondering if you'd do a podcast on how you've come to choose which schools to send your children to. I know, Bridget, that you had some issues last year and have had to change. And Jules, you've spoken about wanting a certain type of education for your kids, but that your firstborn had other ideas. I'm really interested to hear firstly your own personal conscious beliefs and values and resulting choices around how your kids will be educated, i.e. in what system. I guess I'm wondering what impact on early decisions had on the following: your preference for style of education and living, thoughts on religion, family, time, energy, work dynamics, local socioeconomic factors, who your kids will be interacting and making friends with based on where they go to school. Secondly, how you recognise that your children will suit what you've chosen or not. And finally, how to make both of the above work for everyone, if that's even a thing. A little preface is why I'm suggesting this. My eldest is nearly 3 and in 3 years will be starting school. We are trying to figure out how we'll school him, and our youngest is another boy. I'd prefer as much play-based experiential learning as possible, so Steiner or homeschooling style. However, also on the table are the usuals: public school in a city that has a low socioeconomic families living right next to the middle high school. So public school has children from all works of life, which I'm unsure about. Catholic school, we'd have to baptise the kids based on my religion, which we don't practice at all. And finally, private schooling, which we feel isn't justifiable financially based on our own education through the public system. I'm having trouble separating my beliefs from what's practical, time, energy, work-wise, financially, and our long-term families. For our long-term family, what's socially a good idea for the kids with the kinds of people they'll hang out with at certain schools, and then what's right for my kids as individuals in terms of personality and learning style.
There is so much here.
So much.
And I read it I wanted to start recording straight away. I was like, oh my God, I have so much to say on all of this because it's such big stuff, and it's, stuff that you and I have both spent a lot of time thinking about, I think, over the years.
It's true.
So
where do you want to start? I did like a hacked out version of some basic points. So I wonder if we could start with perhaps impact. So what impact some of these things had that ended up in a choice. So your preference for education and living style. What was yours?
Gosh. I guess I take it, I'm trying to think about how I've arrived, where I've arrived, or what were some of the, when my son was born, like what I wanted for him and why I think I was investigating schools even when he was 6 months old, or at least investigating learning styles, I suppose. Because I think I really trusted from the beginning that our children come here with unique gifts and with innate talents. and that I didn't want him to be molded in a way that disconnected him from those. And so I was always looking for, what does it look like to help a child stay connected to who they inherently are and who they are, who the essence of them is. And rather than being almost kind of treated like a cog in a wheel, and just kind of a kid in a one-size-fits-all system, and this is just what we do and you have to fit. And that also came alongside with it some intense learning that I did, and also through Suburban Sandcastles, doing a number of different films relating to education and understanding how we got the system we got. Where did the system come from? Why?
What light can you shed on that?
Well, the industrial model of schooling, or the schooling system that we have in mainstream school now, came from the industrial era, which was really to how to create good producers. So it was, how do we instill a base level of knowledge to help create great employees, great people who can work on a production line, essentially, people who have a basic set of skills to understand what society needs of them. So it was never a system that was designed to recognize and support and grow genius. It was really set up as like a lowest common denominator system to give everyone a basic set of rudimentary skills to navigate the world in. So I knew that really wasn't inspiring to me. And so then it was, okay, well, how much have we grown from that initial system? And what I found was, well, not much, because we're still organised on a subject basis, which sort of says, we've decided at a government level that this is what all kids should learn, and we're going to break up the day like this, and it doesn't matter where your mind is going, and even if you're on an inspired path and you're in the flow, when the bell rings, we end that subject and we go and do another subject. I saw it as quite disjointed and not able to flow with how we learn, because we're all inspired to learn what's meaningful. There's no such thing as people who don't want to learn. They just don't want to learn what someone's telling them that they have to learn. So that was the view that I came to it with. And so I would look for, okay, well, what are some alternative models of schooling where there is a recognition of the child leading the way in their learning, which interested me too in homeschooling and unschooling kind of models, which completely challenge the whole doctrine of school and a curriculum that someone else says that says that 5-year-olds learn this and 6-year-olds learn that and 7-year-olds learn that, But again, when looking at those things, we also need to consider our own capacity to deliver on what we might want for our child. And I quickly learned that I don't think that I can give them what I feel that they would need from me if I was to homeschool or unschool them. Because if I was to take on a responsibility like that, I would want to dedicate myself 110% to observing them a lot of the time to see what is the next level to scaffold their learning with, what's the next thing to help them expand. And I, rightly or wrongly, have my own desires that I want to expand within myself, and I didn't see how those can all fit alongside each other. So for me, it was then, okay, well, if I'm not going to do that, what can a organised education system offer? Which led me to look into things like inquiry-based learning or play-based learning, Montessori, Steiner. Those are kind of the big ones, because there are inquiry-based models of learning that are in place in some government and non-government schools, which are more play-based, which are more subject-oriented. So, for example, you might be learning about the solar system, but you can express your learning and understanding of the solar system based on how you love to learn. So you might write an essay about it, you might do a talk on it, you might create a model. So you would choose how you express your learning rather than you being told, okay, well, everybody writes an essay or everybody takes a test. It was more fluid and able to work to that own individual child's genius, essentially. So I love that model, but then learned that wasn't really offered in my area unless you go to a private school, which I'd had my son down for, but having 3 children paying full, like I'm talking full private school fees, was not feasible. So, again, we cannot make educational choices in isolation from, our broader family values and what our goals are. So I think that that's what my journey has been a dance between what I really believe and yearn for from an educational point of view, and then what fits practically within our family and each individual's goals within the family. So I feel like I'm talking a lot.
I'm so interested in what you're saying. Oh. Sorry, please don't feel like you're monopolizing. I'm enjoying it.
Well, and I guess for me, there's so much in this conversation because, like I've done so many things with Hugo and he's, only nearly 6. We've tried so many different things. And I mean, Montessori was something that we've really jumped at kind of quite quickly. We dabbled in it when he was young and we'd done a lot of those principles at home, even from birth. But to really get him into that educational model, it was quite sudden because we had the opportunity for him with a prep year. And even though that was incredible and I learned as a parent so much, and I became a better parent actually, I think, from observing how he was learning and being interacted with and how respected he was and how respected all of those children were in that class, was really humbling and inspiring to me. And now we find ourselves with him doing mainstream prep again, or doing prep again in a mainstream school because the school that Montessori program was in couldn't see the vision and the value of Montessori and no longer continued it. It's an incredibly long story. I'm not even going to go into it now, but it was huge. It was a massive thing, and it gave me a real sense of, and more of an insight into bureaucracy, more of an insight into government, and more of a, acceptance of the fact that, it is we are as humans responsible for our own growth because it's really not what
legislation is made of.
Yes, yeah. And what our society really encourages either is not our best necessarily or our innate genius or our innate value. We have to champion that for ourselves. And so he spent the last 4 months at home. And if you read the newspaper article, we were on the front page of The Age in September last year, and it said, I would be homeschooling him. But essentially it was, I will be directed by him. So I will be looking for what he's interested in, and we will simply, I guess it was kind of like unschooling. It was, I didn't give him any forced lessons to continue on from what he'd been working with. I just simply trusted that what he was learning and needing right now was exactly where he needed to be. And he spent an enormous amount of time building Lego, which is his genius. And I have no doubt that in the future we will look back and see how perfect that was for him, how we couldn't understand what that was leading to, but oh my God, as if it couldn't have led to this, And so I think that in all kinds of ways that I look at education, I think it comes back to trusting what our children are inspired by and finding ways to support that and finding ways to get their educational model or system or whatever it is that we're choosing for them to see that in them too and find ways to awaken that. Because I remember, I think you were talking about a time when, Heath wasn't really that interested in reading and you were posing to the teacher, well, what about if you actually we looked at a book on a subject that he was really interested in, maybe then he might like to read it. And these can seem like such novel concepts, when parents haven't been critical about school and just accept that what school says goes. But in fact, I'm not going to expect my kids to read or do something that's incredibly uninspiring to them without some kind of without some kind of resistance from them. And it's about how we work with that resistance within them and within ourselves when we are having to fit a one-size-fits-all approach to education. So I'm, in this stage now, we're 1 week into mainstream, and the comparisons are so stark, in terms of what he's coming home with, and I really have to.
Can you break those down a little?
Yeah. So last year in Montessori, it was the Montessori environment is set up. It's like a prepared environment for the child to lead the way in their own learning. So it's based across 4 different models. So sensorial, so sensory-based learning is actually a key part of learning in the Montessori model. And Montessori focus first on social and emotional development, and everything else comes underneath that. So your literacy and numeracy skills are acquired as part of a focus on social and emotional development, not first and foremost. So you've basically flipped the pyramid essentially. So in mainstream schooling, and I saw this black and white when I was at the information night last week, it's all about literacy and numeracy. This is what we want your kids to be at. This is what we want them to learn. This is how we're going to teach it. And everything else kind of falls underneath that. Montessori is quite different. It has a strong value on those, but it teaches those by osmosis through engagement with certain materials that are designed to elicit that. And, you know, his teacher was always asking me what he's interested in at home and how we could, like, you know, a couple of weeks in, she was like, hey, I can see he's right into planes, so I'm going to arrange like some special cards to be done up with all of the names, and he can come up and do a presentation on all of these planes, and at the same time that will help him to learn how to spell those things because they're of value to him. So everything was about how do we look at the child and follow the child and help them learn these skills in alignment with what's inspiring to them. That was essentially the education that he got last year. Now it's like, here's a worksheet. We're doing this now. You know, very different. He's come home with, last year there was no real praise. It was always about how do you feel about your work and building a really strong sense of intrinsic motivation. Whereas mainstream schooling is praise their efforts, praise, you know, how they're doing something. And so he's come home with like 3 good job stickers in a couple of days, you know. So it's just different. It's not bad or wrong, it's just different. But I guess because of my learning, I find it hard to, because I don't see that's necessarily effective as a way to develop intrinsic motivation, is to get a reference for how good you are based on what someone else thinks. And I think, you know, we know that particularly as teenagers, you struggle so much with, who am I? Am I okay to be me? You know, how me can I be? And if you're cultured to determine how okay you are based on how okay someone else thinks you are, it's harder and harder to stay connected and listen to what you really want and who you really are. And so I struggle with a system that does that inherently, you know, and from a young age. So yeah, I'm dancing that edge, but also really seeing that for all of the things that I struggle with in terms of that mainstream model, I can see that rudimentary models, even like Montessori and Steiner, as wonderful as they are, sometimes you can get stuck in a paradigm too, or you can get stuck in a particular model and think it's the right way and not be able to see any way out of it. So I think it's good to also challenge bias, and I've really been working on challenging my bias toward Montessori as we enter mainstream, and try to find the benefits to Hugo of not being in there anymore, and what does he gain. And you know, one of them is the fact that we walk to school in like 5 minutes, and what that sense of community gives. Like, that's enormous. So there are so many facets to the school decision, and it's more than just educational philosophy. It is looking at your child. I think Hugo would actually be fine anywhere. Like, he's pretty social. He's quite bright, so he'd be okay anywhere. You know, if I had a child who, you know, was on the spectrum or was really struggling or had difficulty socially, I would perhaps be much more sensitive to that school choice than I perhaps have come to find myself. But I do have confidence that it'll be okay for him, and that as a family, and then the values we instill as a family and how we look at him as an individual, there's so much that we can extend upon that school won't give him, and to take that ownership as a family, and also for all the things that school doesn't support or challenge it or doesn't awaken, or in fact what we're in opposition to, how does that help him to learn how to critically assess things and critically think about the information that he's been told? Because we know as children, you know, you subordinate first to your parents and then you subordinate to your teachers. Like, it's just how we develop as humans. We run these subordinations, and, you know, it took me a long time to realize my parents weren't God, right? And so I'm going to be having conversations with my son at a younger age about, you know, challenging teachers and finding respectful ways to disagree and finding ways to communicate difficult things in a way that can still help that person feel heard and not necessarily judged. Because I think that if kids aren't supported to challenge, then they become adults who accept bullshit from bureaucracy or employers or anyone else. So there are merits in having a inverted commas bad teacher or a disrespectful someone, you know, because it's from those challenges that we equip ourselves with the skill sets to work through them. So in some ways, like I look back and I think, gosh, you know, I had such an easy time because I never really worried about Hugo's education. Like last year I was like, oh, I know he's like nailing it. I know it's amazing. I don't even feel like I have to challenge anything. In fact, I wish I was in that classroom. Like, I used to sit there and observe because we got to observe the class, and I would just have tears like of inspiration about how beautiful it was. But then because I knew he was getting that at school, it's almost like I could almost relax a little bit at home because I knew how fulfilled and fueled he was in school. Whereas the growth on me now is greater because I know that the school experience might not be like that. So where do I have to grow to help him grow in the ways that school's not going to support him to? You know what I mean? So the responsibility just kind of moved, and it's just being aware of that. I don't know. I have talked so much. I don't even know.
Because this is your genius zone, right?
Yeah, maybe.
You know so much about education.
Yeah. Maybe, I suppose. Yeah. It's an area I've spent a long time learning about, I suppose, yeah. I guess because I find myself in my work that I do now, it's about deconstructing the systems we've come to accept as truth. And you can't know how to deconstruct a system or think critically about a system until you've immersed yourself in enough systems and understood how they work to know how we got there. And I think the more that I learn about the world we've created, the more I realize that truth of that quote, like, you can't create the world that we have as a result of our thinking. We can't create a new world if we don't change our thinking. And I think that there needs to be a revolution in so many areas of society. Education's just one of them. You and I are talking about birth today. It's just one of them. You know, like how we have a birth culture that's created as a result of a patriarchal system and women subordinating and giving over their bodies to other people. We have a system that we've created. How do we deconstruct the system? And sometimes our children being in a system that we don't particularly like helps both us and them create a new system. So how do we co-create with our children a system that we want to be part of? I don't know.
No, I freaking love it. I actually completely love the balance that you've applied there, because I often think that's the danger with choosing, in inverted commas, any system, is because you can become so dogmatic in the belief of whatever that one system is that you're shut off to the drawbacks of that system and the benefits to the other, whatever the other is. And I think that's a disempowered state to be in, because I only think you can make empowered choices when you can actually have everything on an even pedestal and go, I see it all. I see your benefits and your drawbacks, and I see your benefits and drawbacks, and I see yours over there too. So which feels most aligned to me and where we're going? I think that's the place to make a choice.
Yeah, because you take the emotion out of it there.
Yeah, not because you're so shit scared that this might happen and this might happen and this might happen, which means this, which means that, which means this end result of death. You know, like to have already done this trip in your head that has decided the outcome of something you haven't even entered, I think is a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
To be already running a story on them and us and make a choice based on them and us, I think you're missing a lot.
Yeah.
So I love what you said in terms of everything's conserved. It just morphs in form, right?
Yeah.
So therefore the choice is always what's most authentic for me, not what is the system that I'll fit best.
Yes. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I think whatever system you choose, there's room for you to grow and be in relationship with that system and those within that system and grow together. And because I have a few friends actually who are teachers, and that's really changed my perspective on a mainstream education system as well, because I genuinely see how much they care.
Yeah.
I see how much time and effort they invest into knowing, understanding and tailoring their classrooms to fit certain children. And because I see that, I'm not so sucked into the system is this.
Yeah. Because you have nuances within any system, right?
Right.
You have, and, you know, we can all go back, I'm sure, to the teachers who, like,
Who lit us up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the ones who we couldn't get out of their class.
Totally.
And we all have probably an equal balance of that.
Yes.
You know, and I think even in the most idyllic system and environment, you know, you're still going to have the teachers are still human, right?
Yeah.
You're still going to have like ones that, you know, might do everything on paper right or whatever.
Yeah,
you say right
exactly.
is, and actually not be in alignment with that.
Yeah. And we're human. We all have shit going on. You're going to have good years. You're going to have bad years. You know, there's years I've certainly seen it happen with a spectrum of teachers where, you know, it's all good until they have 5 miscarriages and that year in their classroom is a write-off.
Yeah.
Or they've just divorced their husband. That year's a write-off for those kids. So we're also human, and everyone in a system is human, having their own human experiences.
Yeah, and it's funny because for everything, like yes, the classroom's a write-off, but what are those kids learning socially? Like,
Right.
Like, you know, when the teacher's offline, how are these kids
How are they
negotiating
still learning?
socially? Because my mum's a teacher, and so we disagree on some things. Let's just say that. But you know, I hear like she teaches at, you know, a campus of a school that's, you know, they have some kids with really challenging backgrounds, and she often says like, I have to remember what school I'm at, and I have to remember as a result of all of these kids' backgrounds what I'm teaching to. And so often it's behavior management. And she's like, and I get so frustrated because I have all these kids who want to learn, but they can't get any instruction from me because I'm outside with this kid who may have X, Y, Z going on at home and maybe raised by their grandparents and whatever it is. But the reality is it's still taking away from those kids inside who want to learn. And that is the thing about where you're choosing to send your kids socioeconomically, because that was another question from that. And I see that really obviously. But then I also think, yeah, but Mum, like, it's open your perspective wider too. Like, yes, you want to teach this, but what else are they learning about? Like, I know, like, I had to see at school the naughty kids and had to see the rough kids and had to learn about social dynamics and family backgrounds to know what I didn't want to create. And so how is even those kids, how is that learning for them? Yeah, it's not the instruction you wanted to give, but how is that powerful learning? So I think sometimes we also need to bring our perspective back and open it wider to be able to look at more than just delivery of a curriculum or delivery of a topic, or, you know, to look at what else is there.
Yeah, I totally think that as well. Will you pick a question? Where do you want to go?
I guess a big one, I think, particularly we're on this conscious motherhood journey, is we bring consciousness to so many of our choices, right? And very often our idyllic choices when our kids are babies and toddlers and they're just these perfect little beings and we just want this magical world for them, that what we want to instill and who they are can sometimes clash. Or we might not be able to necessarily see them yet through the filter that we've put on the experience we want them to have. So that was a big learning curve for you, I know, in that you had like this vision of the Steiner education. And it was Heath that really broke that fantasy for you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a bit about what that looked like as a personal journey, and perhaps even like a letting go of ego to grow into who you had to become to be mainstream, to go mainstream in inverted commas?
Yeah, okay. Yes. So I spent 5 years studying naturopathy and immersing myself in all things anti-system. And if it had a fuck you system on it, I was all part of it.
So it's almost like those of us who did arts degrees and like the Marxist groups at uni.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Same as that, right?
Yeah, same as that. And found myself birthing consciously, awakening more of myself consciously, choosing respectful, conscious ways of parenting. And the natural flow on from that is, who do I want my child to be? And when I thought about who I wanted my child to be, I wanted them to be, probably foremost in my mind, was emotionally connected to who they are. And I saw the mainstream system, I saw sport and competition as grouped into that, as being a way to eliminate children's capacity to grow and develop emotionally. That they would be stunted. They would be, the soft sweetness would be, cast out of them or, demonized out of them. And they would be these mere pale reflections of who they really were. That's what I thought the system was.
They'd be standardized and
yeah, and shunned and not allowed to cry and rant and be part of, that whole aware parenting journey that I was on then. And I'm a very creative person, and I deeply honour and value arts and whatever form art comes in within your world. And so my natural flow on from that was I was in a playgroup with a lot of Steiner mums. So we went to, Steiner playgroup, and the flow on from that is that you go to Steiner Kindergarten, and it's beautiful. There's no plastic. There's, everything is beautiful and natural and handmade, and like you step back in time 150 years ago. And I loved it because I was all anti everything that had anything to do with media and whatever. But my son... And I feel like there almost needs no more than that sentence. Yeah. Certainly being a child would roll with it. But he never really wanted to go to kinder. He couldn't wait to go home. He always used to choose very specific ways of playing with the same toys, but whenever we entered the space, it was always, because it's set up very much like a home environment, so everything is clean and tidied and packed away in its one spot, and it doesn't really change. The children are allowed to investigate and change as they want their play to take them in their learning. But he was seeking for more stuff, and so his behaviour started to deteriorate. So he would choose the fighting, punching, raging games over, because there's kind of nothing else.
Yeah.
And what I found also interesting about being in the Steiner model, and then everyone went to primary school from there, was it is an environment which attracts a demographic of people that don't fit in mainstream. Now, part of that is going to be, they have about a 40% intake of spectrum children versus mainstream where it's 5 to 10.
Yeah.
And that also changes and impacts
the environment.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of behaviour management that happened by virtue of having a particular cohort of children. And so when... just to flash forward, when we went to mainstream, that was actually contrastly very different, despite the fact that it's a completely different socioeconomic group and, in fact, lower, but a completely different experience in cohort.
So it's so interesting.
It's interesting, isn't it? And at the same time, I had friends, with kids the same age who were making different choices. Now, some of those friends went and moved to the co-op schools, so parent-run school that we have here in Victoria, and they hire a teacher as a group of parents, and they have an educational system, and they educate their children in almost like a rotational roster of parents together, overseen by an educator. So I've kind of witnessed, I had some friends that went to Montessori, some friends who continued with Steiner. Anyway, long story short, I could see my son was actually really struggling where he was. Not overtly, because he is the type of cat that's going to fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
But I could tell there was just inklings. I knew it in my stomach. There were inklings of, I feel like this isn't the lit up amazing space I thought it was going to be, And I could also see that I was conforming. So I was even more polarized on anything, could never wear black. I freaking love wearing black. Couldn't wear black. You're not allowed to wear black in Steiner. It's all rainbows.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I could see that I was changing. The other really interesting thing is, even though we're in a cohort of Steiner parents, a lot of those parents, given there's a large amount of behavioural issues, used screens a lot. So play dates were based around bring your iPad.
Isn't that interesting? Because it seems to be completely at odds with Steiner philosophy.
But isn't that interesting? Because as you were saying, Bridget, everything's in
conservation, right? So whatever they're repressing or whatever they're not making space for, it has to come out somewhere.
Yeah. Anyway, there was just a few inklings where I was like, it's feeling like it's not the dream scenario that I thought it was going to be. And I remember working up to it this one day, getting down and saying to my son, because we actually sent him for about 6 months because he's an April baby. So in Australia, you have your school year. If you turn a certain age before the end of April, then you're in that year, or you choose.
Same as Hugo. So he could have been either really young,
right? Exactly.
Or he could have been quite a bit older.
Right. So we chose to hold Heath back. So he did 6 months of a mainstream kinder just because we could get him in there. Yeah. Before he moved to Steiner Kinder, and then I thought we were on the Steiner path from there. Anyway, so he had a little bit of a taste of mainstream. So I got down one day and said to him, I can see that, that you're struggling here and here and here. And I just wanted to, as we're deciding this next year, what you want to do you feel like you want to stay at Steiner where we are with your friends and we just keep going? Or do you feel like you want to go back to that other kinder? He was like, I want to go back.
Didn't miss a beat.
No, didn't miss a beat. And I was like, oh, and in my head I'm going, damn it, I shouldn't have given him the option, and I really wrestled with myself internally, because I also knew like on some really deep level, I knew that was his truth. But I didn't want to make the move. I was really happy in this community. Right. I was really fulfilled by this group of women. Yep. I was, I was no longer a social outcast as I had experienced for the rest of my life. I could be as wild woo-woo hippie as I wanted, and it was loved in this space.
And you probably could have still been out hippied.
100%.
You could have been out hippied, right?
I totally out hippied.
Yeah.
Which for me was just like this crazy, experience. Anyway, so all of this kind of culminated, and in the end, I really asked myself, if I am really honest with wanting to build my child's sense of autonomy, then this is one of those moments where I have to listen to him and not me. And it's just kinder. Who cares? So I said, okay. So we said goodbye to Steiner and we moved into mainstream kindergarten. And I remember talking to the teacher about, separation anxiety, because it had always been hard with Heath, and, how we would manage that, and that I would stay for a while. And they were amazing. They were like, stay as long as you like, come, go, say you got to pop out for milk, whatever, if it's really a problem, we're going to call you. So I had this beautiful scenario where for the whole of first term, I just kind of hung out at kinder. And, you really get to witness a lot when you're just almost invisible in a space. And what I witnessed completely transformed the way that I saw mainstream school, because I had all these judgments and perceptions based on a system I'd never actually been in.
Yeah.
They were just part of the other stream that I was conforming to.
Yeah, and I really hope that's where I find myself, how can I open to this, and how can I question my own polarizations, right?
Yeah, because you become the result of the 5 people you spend the time with, right? And it wasn't my experience, but I was living off the filters of their experiences. Anyway, so what I saw in this space was some really beautiful teachers who cared deeply about play-based learning. So we chose a play-based kinder and offered, so the space itself and the activities offered within it as focal points changed every single session. So 3 times a week, he walked into a completely, like the environment structures, of course, were the same, but the activities offered for engagement followed a theme, but were completely different. And he was so engaged and so lit up. And I can still remember this one moment where I walked in and she went, oh, we've really noticed how much Heath loves mammals and dinosaurs and underwater creatures. So we've created a play space today for him that, you know, and she created this whole space that was just to take him to the next step.
So special.
And I could nearly cry talking about it now. In fact, when we had our AGM at Kinder the other year, when I handed over, I bawled my eyes out because I was like, they're just so amazing and I can't do. Anyway, so I really got to shift all of the perceptions and judgments I had on these mainstream teachers that I felt in my heart of hearts were honouring my child more deeply than the heartfelt, soul-centred Steiner teachers. It just looked different, right?
Yeah.
And he flourished, like hit the ground running, expanded. And I thought, wow.
That's so amazing.
I can't deny that.
Yeah.
Like this is huge, right? And so when it came to choosing schools, we did all of the tours. All of us together. So my husband, myself and my son, we went to all of them. And I went to their open days and I made separate interview times to go when the schools were not running so that you could really, didn't have open days.
Yeah.
So you could really see the classrooms in action. And, you know, we probably went to 6 different schools locally. And so when we decided we weren't going Steiner because this was not Heath's journey, then it became, okay, then it needs to be local, because local for me was a huge benefit in that Steiner was about a half an hour drive for us, which then meant all of their peer group is potentially an hour away.
Yeah.
So every play date, every before and after school drive, every birthday party, every sleepover, I would be committing to driving an hour there and back.
That was my experience last year.
That's a life in itself.
Yeah.
Right? Forget about fitting anything else in. You can't unless you're going to move there. So the benefit with local was we didn't have to go far. We would run into people everywhere, at the shops, at the park, at the beach. You know, it becomes very intimate in the kids that you do sport with. They start to know everyone in the local area, and then they see them. They see them there, they see them there, they see them there, you know. And now my son in high school knows a huge cohort of children by virtue of simply being involved in extracurriculars within the community.
Yeah.
Knows a whole heap of kids. So local became a really big focus for us to keep it local. And I wanted my children to have the experience of riding to and from school and riding around to a mate's house. And yeah, sure, go to the party. Yeah, no worries, I'll pick you up, you know, without it being a huge lifestyle commitment. Yeah. So we looked and we narrowed it down to one public school I really loved. And we had the local Catholic school. Now, I'm not Catholic. I was baptised Church of England, but, you know, really have more of a hippie spiritual version of life. My husband is baptised Catholic, but certainly wasn't practising. And we didn't like the Catholic school as much as we liked what the public school seemed to offer. And generally, public schools get better funding than what private schools do, which is why your Catholic schools generally are going to have slightly, not always, but slightly, I don't know what the word is, but not as good facilities because they're not as funded as the public schools and they don't charge as much as the private schools to make that up. So they're kind of in this no man's land in the middle. Yeah. But then we decided before we chose a primary school, we better think about what the next step is because it influences it. And we decided our local schools we knew were being zoned that next year. So what used to be an option where kids could pick and choose where they wanted to go within our sort of relative vicinity was now going to be zoned. So the school that we were zoned to was a was a public school with a very low socioeconomic background and had a lot of public housing being developed in the area, so which would also keep it in a certain socioeconomic
Zone.
Yeah. I didn't really want my child going there because you are influenced by the peer group that you have, and what is possible in your life often you only see by being inspired by those around you. You don't know what's possible until you see it sometimes. Which then meant if we went Catholic, it opened up our options for high school. And if we went down that path, we then had 2 or 3 other options that we could consider, assuming our child wasn't going to get in on a scholarship or anything and be zoned, So we then decided, okay, well, then we're going to go through the Catholic system because by virtue of it offers the same educational system, it's a nice little school, and it gives us options for high school. And that's how we chose it. It just happens that it turned out to be the best choice we ever made. But I didn't know that. I just had a feeling in my stomach, these 2 feel good. I feel like they would suit my child. And what's the step after that? And where, what's the domino effect there? Having said that, I will put out to you, you don't have to be baptised or Catholic to be in a Catholic school. Catholic schools are zoned with, we take all of the Catholics first and then we take the others. So don't feel like that needs to be a hindrance.
Although I think it's a bit trickier at high school.
No.
Really? I know the one that I went to, it's...
Probably depends on demand,
though. I think the one I went to, they are still pretty...
I would say it depends on area and demand. Yeah. But they certainly do. Most Catholic schools have a requirement to take around 15% of non-Catholics anyway. So I wouldn't wipe that off if that's a consideration for you. The other factor is that they've taken a lot of the biblical teachings and certainly sacraments out of school. They're now done through the parish. So often the requirement is if you're going to go down the path of doing your sacraments and whatever, that you need to come to church to get a Catholic education. You don't get it through school anymore. So what you get in school is a prayer every morning. You get a religious block during the week where you learn about the biblical stories, and you do prayers before you eat your lunch. And, there's different times of the year that they celebrate through ritual. So, normal Catholic holiday seasons. So what I like about that is that I thought I would really struggle with that, this patriarchal version of God and certainly a Catholic version of God. And I had a lot of issues with a lot of that. And I really thought I would struggle with it. Turns out I'm immensely grateful. And what I'm immensely grateful for is that I see, by virtue of being in a spiritual system, we have spiritual conversations at home that I know my mainstream friends don't have because it's not even part of the conversation. How do you enter a conversation like that in your home if your kids don't even have any type of awareness of it at school?
Yeah.
You kind of just don't because there's lots of other things to talk about. Whereas my kids are learning about God and who we are as humans and the principles of what humanity is. And all of those, I can tell you, the very base ones, they are shared through all of the spiritual sectors. So I've studied many of them. They all have very intermingled baseline teachings of humanity and spirituality. So, I say to my kids, God, Goddess, universe, you, it's all kind of interchangeable, but let's talk about that as a concept. And so, we talk about that. Who are we bigger than ourselves? And we talk about the stories in the Bible, and we talk about the stories, that have been handed down through various folklore. They're all stories with a message. And I happen to like all of those messages. And some of the Old Testament stories are pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, I mean, and I I think about this because I had 12 years of Catholic education. And that's one thing that I really struggle with my kids not having is that it just seemed like there was just ritual after ritual and, it was beautiful. There's lots of stuff that I look back and didn't like. There was particularly, 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
The subordination you know, and the confessions of what you've done wrong and that. I don't think it's like that now.
No, it's not.
But that certainly still colours my view a little bit of it, and probably why there's more in the way for me to enter it again.
No, totally get it.
But I do feel like, you know, if you don't have some kind of spiritual grounding, whether it's at school or in the family home, committed to growing that, then our society's spirituality is consumption, really. So there is a lot of merit in considering whether a Catholic or some kind of religious-based school would add value.
Yes, and that's all I'm saying is
like,
don't just wipe it off because of the assumptions that you have without being within that system.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that it changes from school to school as well.
Totally.
And look, I'm sure that it does.
Yeah.
My experience is that it's a really beautiful spiritual grounding, and I'm really grateful for that because it then becomes part of my children's conversation and it becomes easier for me to have, you know, out of the blue spiritual conversations with them about, you know, social stuff they're going through. I can take it bigger than them because they already have an understanding that there's something bigger at play than them and that there's kind of this guiding master plan that they're part of. And that's easier to have when you have a base foundation. So I really actually really like it. And I actually really like, I mean, so much of the Catholic rituals are based off of the stolen pagan ones, right? Like it's just overlaid.
Yeah.
And when you strip it back, it's actually really beautiful. I've sat in monasteries and had candles lit and songs sung, and I have felt something in my body. And I feel that in church too. So sometimes we have to take away the shit to see
the shine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, look, I think that's that. I think my daughter would do better in Steiner school than what she would do in mainstream in the Catholic school that we're in. I don't think she's quite so round peg, round hole as my son is. I do think she would like to experience her world in more of a sensory manner. And I do think she would do better if she was allowed the opportunity to explore herself through art. But I thought I could be that person that could tailor my children's educational experiences to meet their individual needs. Turns out I can't. I just know I do not have the time, the energy, the capacity, or the inclination to drive you here and you there and you there, and then pick you all back up again, and then deal with 3 different sets of friends and 3 different sets of interviews and 3 different sets of way the school's running. I would spend my entire life schooling my children, but I'm not homeschooling. But I would if that was the commitment I made. And I knew in my heart of hearts, for me, outside of my children, I couldn't make that commitment. And same as you know, when my kids were in playgroup, we dabbled in unschooling groups and homeschooling groups, and I kind of tested the water. But I knew I was having enough trouble handling my own triggers and my own shit in my parenting. If I tried to add on the pressure and the layer of education, I would be a fucking train wreck, and I'm pretty sure I would fuck my kids up in the process. So I knew their best educational experience wasn't going to be intimately with me.
Yeah.
And like you, I also knew I wanted my children to have the best experience that they could have, but I want that for me too. And to some extent, that comes at a bit of a cost in a way. I mean, it doesn't too, right? Because I'm getting lit up and inspired. And how does that educate and show my children the very thing that I couldn't if I was totally invested in them? Like, I want to say there is totally an even keel there, but I have to give up on some of the ideals that I have around you'd be better here and you'd be better there. And, you know, there's still part of my heart that feels tender about that. But having said that, also, she's totally thrived. She's school captain this year. She has gained an enormous wisdom. She's made a great go of it. Right. Yeah. She's made an enormous body of wisdom on how to be socially, emotionally aware and connected. And that's what's got her to school captain. And she has learned that through a mainstream system. And not because she's had the best teachers at that, but because she has me at home. And any teacher will tell you it's not what happens in school, it's what happens at home that has the greatest influence.
My mum says, after 30 years of teaching, she's adamant that that's everything. And I think sometimes she would question why I cared so much about the school and why I was so focused on the education, because she's like, that most of it's you.
Well, because I actually had this mini kind of argument with one of my friends who's a teacher the other day, and I'm like, where are you sending your kids? Blah, 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 and she's like, it's the local public school. And I was like, but you're a teacher. You know the system. You know what's out there. And she's like, uh-huh. And that's why I don't care. It's all the same. And I had to have this moment where I was like, wow, because there's part of that's total truth, right?
Yeah.
I'm making it mean all of this stuff, but ultimately what I do at home allows my children the space to flourish wherever they are.
And I think that too, and I think, and particularly some of the big feelings and big behaviour stuff I've been working with Hugo the last few weeks, I've been thinking my the home life that I'm creating for him means that he has the safety to bring all of that here. So it doesn't actually need to really come out at school. So all of those little things that he doesn't feel safe expressing, all those little areas that he might cap himself off, or I've created enough emotional safety that can be heard here in this home and him come back into balance into who he is without there needing to be mass disconnection, And I think that is 80% of it, because they kind of know what they need. And if we can be that place for them to crash against, even when school's hard, it's about trusting that they're also perceiving what they need to perceive from the teacher and getting something out of this dynamic. And, it's about us also seeing that even the challenges that they're going to face at school are on some level meaningful. And it's funny with the whole teacher thing, because I know a bunch of teachers, and I'm in these different homeschooling groups on Facebook because I see stuff pop up, and there's also a massive cohort of teachers who become parents who never want to put their kids in the system because of what they've seen in the system. But then also I think, but how much of that is your stuff that's come up for you as a teacher that's unhealed, and therefore you can't go back there again with your kids? How much are we looking, how much self-awareness do we bring to that?
And actually that's what I wanted to say as well about socioeconomics and that jab of high school. So that high school that I said to you I chose, no, we're not going there. It has a really poor socioeconomic group. I have since met so I did a life-saving for a while, and I was on duty with some teenagers who went there. And I've met a few along the way that are siblings of, some of my friends' kids. And I have to say I have been forced in a way to change my perceptions of a low socioeconomic school, because being that they have a tougher, rougher background, the facilities on mental health and support in those schools far surpasses any private school.
Really?
In fact, I was talking to a grandma yesterday at one of the prep things who her eldest grandson is 16, and he's just transferred from a really prestigious private school to the local public school and is flourishing mentally and emotionally. He was at the point of suicide in the private school. Right?
Yeah.
And these kids that I was on life-saving duty with, sure, they're not academics, but these kids have a path with a group of teachers that believe in them that just looks like a trade or some other part of them that's not the academic that's going to uni, but they see this child and they think he's pretty cool and they're willing to work with him on that. So, and, this kid I was chatting to last night, he's the older sibling, he goes there, beautiful, connected, well-rounded dude. So I also want to say, I'm pretty sure if my kids went there, they'd work it out.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because we really have to examine our stories, because I've got a massive one on that.
Yeah, I do.
Massive.
I do. And actually one of my really good friends has gone back to teaching full-time this year in high school, which is also from a really poor socioeconomic background. And the facilities that they have to, in inverted commas, throw at these kids to support them to get out of that. So mental, emotional well-being support to pull these kids through. I don't know another school that has that.
Wow.
So, you know, and that type of education system attracts a type of teacher who's really inspired by teaching. Sure, you're going to get the ones that end up there, of course, but I think you kind of get the ones that are cruising anywhere. They're just going to, you know, live out their time until they can get a pension.
Yeah.
But it also attracts the teacher who is inspired, who probably has had a rough journey themselves, and they know the soul that's at the heart of the bad kid. And they're working with the kids that have got difficulties because they get where they come from. You know, so I just think it's all in conservation, right? What they're not getting at home, they're getting at school. And don't judge the low socioeconomic group for that, because there's also some really beautiful kids in there. Do they come from families that value education and where they're going? Probably not. And that's what I do get choosing a private school.
Yeah.
I get a set of parents who deeply value education, mostly, and who want their children to go further. I do too. So, I don't know, 6 of one, half a dozen of another, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you take the leap of faith, and if it doesn't work, another window will open.
You can change.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think it's exactly right. And I think it's just that's really wise to look at why we might believe what we believe, and how can we see a broader perspective, and how do we enter into it. Like I even noticed, like I'm really consciously questioning how I'm entering into relationship building with other mums, like school mums, because like for me it was effortless for me to be me with, you know, these Montessori parents who had, I mean, you don't choose an education like that unless you have done your research. And I mean, a lot of people don't even know what it is. So to have actively made a choice and travel long distances to put your child in a particular stream like that, it gets a certain kind of person. And so I could know that I could talk about all the stuff I value, and that largely people would understand what I'm talking about. And so I could just show up with less guarded, more sure of who I was, and just be me. Whereas I'm noticing like my resistance to, you know, entering into this, you know, new creation of relationships and going, oh, how me can I be, right? And it's interesting like how I'm parenting myself to show up more and be more of me, because that's what I want my kids to be able to do, like to not have to be a chameleon wherever they go, like depending on the social setting. How can I lean into this new world? It's a new world for me as well as my child, and be okay and be willing to be uncomfortable, but still say yes to things, and be involved and be open to all of the other versions of genius and love that these parents have for their children, even if it looks different to what I see as valuable, you know? And so it's a huge learning curve and mind expanding experience for me that might not have been what like I might have said it was my ideal, but I think there's a lot of merit in it.
Well, we're going to wrap it up there because I feel like this is a really fun podcast.
Me too. I don't even know if we got to everything, but yeah, maybe we'll come back to it. I don't know. It's a big, you know, big question, big decisions, but it's about consciously questioning how we're entering that decision making and what beliefs we hold.
Definitely. So thank you to our beautiful letter writer.
Yes.
And if you have a podcast topic or a question you'd love us to hash out, then we'd love to hear from you. So you can contact us through nourishingthemother.com.au or Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening. We are immensely grateful that we can just be us and that you want to hear that. That's a really cool place to be.
It sure is.
Yeah. So connect with you, Bridge.
SuburbanSandcastles.com, and you, Jules?
Is thepleasurenutritionist.com.
And remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.